The idea to do a great debut albums video has been floated around before. To me, people have said, you know, you should do something like this, you could think of doing something like this. It's never been like officially requested, like official, but it's been there, and I thought maybe I should do something like this. It's a fun idea for a video, why not? You know, there's been lots of lists in the past from different publications, different other reviewers in the spectrum of YouTube that have done videos like this. Why not make my own? You know, why not? I know Rolling Stone have been doing their own lists pretty recently, and of course they've had their own controversies surrounding those particular lists, and they did a list like this. They did 100 albums though, and I think that's a lot. And I looked through that list, and I ain't gonna lie, I don't think like even half of those were that great albums. So as we're going to do my own version of this list where I think these albums are great, and I'm not going to do 100. I think I'm just going to stick to a rounded 10, a fair amount of albums that I think are really great, like truly great. You know, I'm not just going to pad it out because this album was influential to this genre and this album did this for this genre. That's great, but I'm talking about what I think are great. You know, what are great debut albums? What really blew me away by the brilliance of the debut album? What does it do that makes it so good? And I'm just going to pick out 10 here. I'm not going to go in any particular order. I just want to do an alphabetical order, starting with A, of course. And I'm mentioning Arctic Monkeys. Now, the thing with this list is I'm going to try and blend some really, you know, famous albums while also mentioning ones that would never really get mentioned elsewhere. I think that's a fair way to do it. And of course, the main thing is that they're great. And to be fair to Arctic Monkeys, they kicked off their career fantastically. This is such a statement of an opening album. It separates them immediately from everyone else that was making rock music at the time. They had such a unique angle to them that not many other rock acts were able to really achieve. I mean, there's always been that kind of like working class sort of brand that's been applied to some Britpop bands of the 90s, but they didn't really have that attitude in the way that Arctic Monkeys had when they came through. I mean, the sheer rawness of this album is fantastic. It sounds like it was, you know, recorded in a bloody garage. It sounds like there wasn't a huge budget that was thrown into it. I mean, I'm sure there was a bit of a budget, obviously, but it just feels very raw and just earthly and just straight to the point, just no fucks given rock music. And lyrically, it's exceptional as well. I just think the approaches to writing is so unique. It has such a unique take on, you know, Sheffield as a city, but you can apply many of the lyrics to other towns and cities that are perhaps deprived in the UK. You could even liken it to other countries where they have deprived areas too. You know, what happens when the sun goes down? Things might look okay, but immediately when the night hits, the crime comes out and the dodgy folk start coming out as well. Fake Tales of San Francisco, kind of poking fun at other bands too. There's just a lot lyrically here that I think is really fun. They have such a sense of humor on this album that I don't necessarily think translated across the rest of their albums, to be honest. I'd say maybe even the second album is on par with this album, but even then it still feels like this album's slightly above it in terms of how just angsty and in your face it is, while also not being annoying. You can do this in a way that comes across really annoying, but Arctic Monkeys never did that, and I think this album stands the test of time for sure. Next, we're going to Black Sabbath. I mean, what hasn't been said about this album already, but just the sheer influence alone puts it on a list like this. And I've already said I'm not doing just influence because I want to talk about what I think is great. But when you pair that with how good an album is, and you know how well it did in terms of having such an impact on the landscape of music, it just makes it all the more better. Ozzy Osbourne just has such a unique voice, and the instrumentals are just so hellish without being too in your face. It kind of like it teases you a little bit. It's sort of like more like a psychological thriller as opposed to, you know, instant, you know, constant jump scares in your face. Like it feels like it, particularly the opening track just has this gloominess to it. It has this doominess to it. It feels like a funeral that no one showed up to. It's just that eeriness that you can't quite describe or get anywhere else. It just did something so special with this album, man. It's insane how ahead of its time it is, but also how even like, what, 50 years now? 52 years, I think? God damn, it still sounds, you know, fresh. It still sounds unique. And that's an achievement right there, to sound like that all these years later. It's insane. Going to Emily Steinwall next with her debut album, which came out last year and was my album of the year, by the way. If you haven't watched that video, go check it out. My best albums, of 2021. Buffalo Staple was a big fan of that list, as we know. And Emily Steinwall, for me, just blew me away immediately. It was one of those aha moments when I put on the first track, Welcome to the Garden. The sprawling lengthiness to it, the way the instrumental just completely shifts throughout, and the vocals are so like operatic and dramatic and just so unbelievably like over the top and theatrical, and it just all works. And even beyond this first track, which is just such a progressive mammoth of a song, you get these really beautiful chamber pop instrumentals coming after. The vocals throughout are stunning. I think I likened her to a dove in my review, which is just so true. I mean, when you have such an angelic voice like that, and she uses it to perfection as well, you know, it's not like she's just flexing her voice that like some singers do. You know, you get your X Factor contestants that all they've really got is just a really good voice, and that's all they have to offer. They don't make interesting music, they just have a good singing voice and then they win the competition. Like I find that so boring. But when you utilize it in a way that Emily does, that matches the instrumentals, everything just sounds so beautiful. It's so like orchestrally arranged, and like this album wasn't even available on streaming for like the first year of its release, or maybe just under a year. I think maybe like 8 to 10 months or something. And it just like, where do you get the talent to just come up with an album like this on your first go, and you didn't even put it on streaming? Like, how ballsy is that? And it's insane. Yeah, just look at the album cover, and honestly, the music matches that perfectly. So if you think this is a nice album cover, you're gonna love the album. Another really out of nowhere debut album. Like I said, I wanted to personalize this to myself, my own taste, but also highlight fantastic albums that aren't going to be mentioned many other places. And Give Me Monaco, man. Oh my God, the brightness. Wow. Give Me Monaco is an act who is actually dropping more music later on this year, actually, which is going to be very exciting. But for the debut album, it just really took me by surprise. I mean, it's got such a progressive flair to it in the house genre. The instrumentals are just so fresh and just feel so natural as well, while also maintaining your attention. They have some really fantastic rhythms in a way that maybe like a John Hopkins would do in his music, but it's just always moving, it's just always traveling, and just always ends up somewhere you're not quite expecting. The tracks just have a great way of maintaining your attention. Some of them run on quite long, but they never get dull. And that was one of the best things about this album for me, was just how exciting it sounded, while also sounding, you know, like other artists or other albums. You know, it's not the most unique thing in the world, but the way it just sounded so unique at the same time was what really took me by surprise. And for a debut album, once again, like Emily Steinwall, two artists here that aren't exactly getting massive streaming numbers or have a massive amounts of, you know, attention or online followings or real life followings. That to me, man, is just what makes music so special. I mean, it's just fantastic. Going way back once again, touching on some soul music now, Lee Moses, Time and Place. I believe Lee Moses died quite young, so this is actually the only album we ever got from the man, but Jesus Christ, The way this never gets talked about in terms of soul albums and soul classics is insane to me. I don't know how it's not mentioned on the level of some of the true classics of this genre. I mean, Jesus Christ, man, I'm a massive Aretha fan, I'm a massive Al Green fan, I'm a massive Stevie fan. You can name all the names from this era of soul music and I'm probably gonna be like 95% a big fan of them. But Lee Moses, Jesus Christ, he should be up there in the conversation. This is one of the best albums of its kind. Vocally, there's kind of like a roughness to his voice. He doesn't hold back. He kind of just like has this gruff like to him, but also he sounds really good as well. The tracks sound pristine. They're produced to perfection, but there's also kind of like a rustic energy to it too. The song Time and Place gets stuck in my head all the time. Just so good, like just a fantastic soul album and one of the best of its kind. Like I say, it is truly a masterpiece of the genre and it's a debut album and it doesn't get talked about enough. This next one to me was one that I was blown away by the fact that it is actually their debut album and it is Nina Simone's Little Girl Blue. Wow, this is a debut, like this is a debut album. This is what's crazy about doing lists like this, is because you think that an artist had a few albums before and then they dropped like the great stuff. But no, this is the first one and it's like ridiculously good. You could really argue many different Nina albums are her best albums. I don't think you could go wrong with saying like Pastel Blues is her best, for example, but Jesus Christ, the traditional nature of this album to me really stands out, and I think Nina's performances, while maybe you could say were a bit more dramatic, a bit more elevated later on because of the lyrical content that she used in some of her later material, like you could argue those are better, but even still, performance-wise, I think this album is just so charming. I just think it's so enjoyable. I just think the instrumentals are just so sprightly and fun and upbeat. I just love her approach to this album, honestly. I think it's insane that it's her first, the oldest album on this entire list as well. But yeah, I mean, I was saying 52 years since Black Sabbath, but I think it's 63 years since this. 63? And it still sounds amazing? What? We gotta have a talk with Sampha though. Someone's gotta sit down and chat with this guy and ask him, why the hell have we only had one album from him in all these years? It is quite despicable, to be honest. I'm sure he has valid reasons, but I don't want to hear those valid reasons. I want to hear the music. Now, this man has been around since like 2010, maybe even a bit before, on so many different features, on so many fantastic features. He's always the highlight of whatever song he's on, even to this day. Father Time by Kendrick Lamar, I mean, he was absolutely sensational on that track, but we're going back even beyond that and he was absolutely sensational on old features too. Just check out any Subtract song from like 2011. But somehow this is the only thing he's put out and it was great and it's still great. It won a Mercury Prize too, which is pretty cool, but damn, it's just a shame that we've only had one iterations of this kind of thing. He blends electronic with pop and has like a nice contemporary sound to him as well. There's some really beautiful moments as well, like No One Knows Me Like the Piano. This album just has everything, honestly. It really gives you so much for just one album. And it feels really replayable too. Usually if you only have one album by an artist, you're just itching to hear more music. And while I am, I'm also just happy to play this quite frequently and never get bored of it. It's really cool. Going way back again to Talking Heads with their first album. I actually only played this for the first time about a month ago, I think it was, before I moved homes. Yeah, what a good album this is. I mean, dare I say it's their best one? I think it might be their best one. I mean, don't get me wrong, Remaining Light is good. Don't get me wrong, but I think this is better. I think I just like the vocal performances on this one. I feel like the consistency of the instrumentals is better. I don't necessarily think it ever really slows down. The tracks just always feel like they're moving at a great pace. The energy is just so lively. There's a manicness to David Byrne and how he approaches lyrics and things that just really stands out on this album for me. And to say it's their first one is just insane. And Psycho Killer, bro. Psycho Killer, just like the best song ever. Okay, just a couple more to mention now. I want to mention Television with Marky Moon. Another classic coming through here. An influential classic, may I add too. I feel like on the art punk and post-punk world, this album has stood the test of time and has really lingered on into many modern bands that approach music in a similar way. But goddamn, just in terms of like the vocals alone, there isn't a band really out there that sounds anything like this. The vocalist is just so mysteriously bizarre, and instrumentally it's just so tight as well. The long tracks, the fucking Marky Moon title track, for example, is just ridiculous and does not get old or boring by the end of it. It's so good. I don't even have many more words to say for this. I just think it's just really enjoyable rock music that has a creative edge to it, that has a unique edge to it. And even again, all these years later, just like some of the other ones I've mentioned, I don't necessarily get a similar sense of the feeling that I would get from listening to something of this genre that I do with this one. It just has something extra to it. It has an essence to it that just makes it feel so unique. It's truly one of my favourite albums of all time. And for it to be a debut, I don't get it. Right, the last one now, Wu-Tang Clan. Wu-Tang Clan, man. It had to be this. Wu-Tang Clan, yeah. Just ridiculous how they achieved this on their first album. And look, I know that the solo acts from Wu-Tang Clan have their own albums that are acclaimed in their own right as well, right? But they never topped this to me, I don't think. I think when they were all together, that to me will always be what makes them best. They have such fantastic chemistry. They know each other so well. This actually has one of my favorite skits ever, honestly, where they're talking through each of the members' qualities and how, you know, each person brings something completely different to the table, and yet they all sound so in harmony with one another. And to be honest, like, that's actually really hard to achieve, because how many rap albums do you know where there are, you know, God knows how many members all coming through together, and the whole album from start to finish is cohesive, consistent, and is as good as this? Because I think it gets a bit underrated how actually difficult it is to be a huge collective of rappers and putting out an album together, and for it to be probably the best one, and in my opinion quite easily the best one out of all of their albums, solo or, you know, with other people, etc, etc, etc. This to me was just such an amazing achievement on first go, and yeah, just fantastic. Has some of the best rap songs ever, some of the most iconic rap songs ever too, and it doesn't get old. It's so good. I haven't really talked about Wu-Tang Clan on this channel before, actually, so it's actually quite nice to talk about them on a video, because I don't think I've ever really mentioned them before. In like the however many years I've been doing this, it kind of feels weird to be this the first time I've mentioned them, but I hope you have stuck around for this entire video and you have heard me praise this album to the high hells. And that's it, that is it. Debut albums, it honestly is really hard to get it right on first go. I think that is something people don't realise. When you look at your most favourite, your best artists of all time, it's rarely ever their first album that is the one that is considered, you know, the best of the best. And I say that, and you might not agree, but look through, honestly, you know, Bob Dylan, for example, David Bowie, friggin' the Beatles, I don't know, Rolling Stones, someone like even more modern like Sufjan Stevens, or just think of all the acclaimed artists that you can think of, the ones you love, And it's actually really quite rare to see that their first album is the best one. I don't think people realise that, honestly, but yeah, this is my list. This is my 10, and you know what? I might even do another list in the future. So if you're thinking, wow, you didn't mention this, you didn't mention this, you didn't mention this, I might do another one later on, but in the comments you should tell me what yours are as well. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I think it's run on a bit long, but I hope you have enjoyed what I've had to say, you agree with my picks, and if you haven't heard any of them, check them out, then let me know and tell me what you think in the comments. Have a good day, subscribe if you haven't already, and goodbye.